As a beginner filmmaker myself, I feel like I'm learning more and more every day as to what it takes to make a shot cinematic. At times, this can definitely be overwhelming, so I have tried to identify three major aspects that I believe go into making shots cinematic. There are definitely many more things to consider than just three things for making a cinematic film, a short film, or even just a single shot. But if you are a beginner filmmaker such as myself and you are feeling a bit overwhelmed with where to start, hopefully this will get the ball rolling for you. First up is color contrast. Contrast can take many forms in an image. You see it with contrast ratios between light and dark. You see it in your warm lights versus your cool lights. You see it in set design. And that last reason right there is why I personally believe Hollywood films look the way that they do. There's so much time and money and effort that goes into creating a set with a delicately curated palette of colors that appeal to us in an image. I'm not saying that it's not possible to create a unique palette of colors or achieve contrast in your sets as a low-budget filmmaker. You just have to be a little bit more creative with how you approach solving that problem. So for example, I think back to my video that I made a few months ago called Cinematography for Beginners by a Beginner, where I set up a really simple shot and my goal was to make this image look as cinematic as possible. And so I did things like tweak the lighting for the lighting motivation and made sure I wasn't clipping any highlights, things like that to help make the overall shot look better. And another thing that I did that made a huge difference in the image that I honestly didn't expect was changing from a white shirt to a yellow shirt. That ended up pairing really well with the primarily green colors behind me. That wardrobe change alone did a lot for elevating the quality of that shot. For the sake of this video, I wanted to push the idea of color contrast to the max, so I created a short horror skit with my wife where I used red colors as primarily this indication of danger and blue to indicate kind of like a moonlight. And so let's watch that now and then we can talk about how I achieved this look afterwards. For the first shot, that red glow that you see behind me was created by just throwing a red gel over my Godox SL60W, and for the blue light I just used this Ulanzi tube light and I just mounted it on a cheap tripod just out of the door frame, out of sight. And for the shot where my wife is kind of peeking around the corner, it was a total of 3 lights used there. I used, again, this tube light. This time this one was set to a red tone. And then I boomed this other small Ulanzi light just overhead to kind of create that moonlight edge light that you saw in her hair. And then when she jumps back into the door frame and you see that kind of like blue cut of light across her face, I accomplished that by cutting out a slit in a cardboard box and then I just taped blue gel across that. That's actually an idea that I borrowed from William Baker's channel, so definitely go check him out. Next up is layering. I love a good lighting setup, but at the end of the day, my favorite go-to way to make a shot cinematic is by adding depth to the image by including foreground and background elements. By doing this, you remind the audience that what they're watching takes place in a three-dimensional world. And that sounds weird, but as an audience member, you need to be reminded that although you're watching this movie or short film on a flat two-dimensional screen, the world this takes place in is three-dimensional. By adding elements both in the foreground and the background, you achieve reminding the audience that what they're watching is three-dimensional. So to show how impactful this is in a shot, I filmed a brief clip kind of the same way twice. One version has a foreground element and one version does not. So let's watch that now so you can see the difference. So the second shot wasn't necessarily a bad shot, but in my opinion it was just missing something. It just seemed kind of like flat and boring, there was no depth in the image. By adding something as simple as a few dead tree branches in the foreground, totally changed the look of what we were watching. I recently rewatched Game of Thrones, and I noticed how often they achieve depth by using this exact same method in a lot of their shots. I notice it a lot in scenes with someone running or walking through woods and they have trees passing in between the subject and the camera. And by having that depth, it just adds a little like spice to the image. And a really simple and creative way that I noticed it was spoilers. In the episode when Daenerys attacks the Lannister fleet with her dragon, in the beginning of that episode, there is a brief shot showing the Lannister army marching, and the camera was just sat in the grass. You could see some grass in the foreground and the Lannister army marching in the background. And just by putting the camera down onto the ground and showing some grass in the foreground, they added depth in their image. And last but not least is a method that I personally have the hardest time with, but I'm going to try and talk to it today, and that is lighting motivation. I like to start out by having all the practical lights in the shot on. This usually makes for a flat image like you can see here, but it's a good indicator to show how much available light you have without introducing anything else. My next step is to do the opposite. I turn all the lights off in the shot, and then I kind of just build up from there. There's a window across the room from me providing some light on my face, and rather than flagging that off, I'm going to keep it because I like the levels it's providing. Next, I wanted to close that shade behind me because it actually acts as like a nice shade of diffusion. And I like the look of this rather than being able to see out of the window because I found it kind of distracting. And here's where the motivated part of light motivation comes in. I wanted to play on that chandelier behind me as motivation for an edge light, so I used my trusty Ulanzi tube light, set it roughly the same color temperature as the bulbs behind me, and set it just off screen right to motivate the chandelier light. In adding that tube light, I feel like I lost some of that daylight that I previously mentioned that I liked in the shot before, so I wanted to add that back by using my Godox light with a softbox on it, just off screen right. And there you have it. Using only available daylight, a practical, and 2 technical lights, we were able to turn a flat, boring shot into something a little more contrasty. I can't close this video without doing the classic YouTuber thing where I leave a bonus tip at the end. Recreate shots that inspire you. When you set out to recreate a look that inspired you or you thought just looked nice on camera, you may not nail that look perfectly in the end, but you are almost guaranteed to learn a lot along the way. For example, this setup was not my unique idea. I actually had just recently watched a Brady Bessett video where he used a very similar setup, and I thought it looked nice and wanted to incorporate that look in my next video, so here I am. And maybe Brady got this idea from something else that he saw, and so, you know, what is art but just this continuation of evolving ideas from one person to another? I'm not saying become a copycat, but as somebody with no film school experience, I feel like I personally learn best by doing what others who are better than me at this, I feel like I learn better by replicating what those people are doing, and that gives me ideas for my own work and inspires me to do things in my own way and tweak their ideas to fit my ideas. Anyways, I hope you found some value in this video today. Take care.